But right now we're talking some CFL, and the euphoria, certainly for Alouettes fans, isn't worn off just yet with Marsh Madness taking over the city, if you will. Tanner Marsh, the quarterback of the Alouettes at the moment. And who better to talk about it with than our next guest? He is an analyst on TSN CFL broadcasts. He's also a man in the know in the Canadian Football League, a former player as well. You can follow him on Twitter.com/Duane Forde TSN. It is Duane Forde. Hey, Duane, how you doing?
Good. How are things, Matthew?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
First question for you, your impressions of the crazy finish that happened Thursday night in Montreal. My dad was at the game. He was wearing a poncho with his buddy because of the weather. And after the fourth interception and the obviously wet conditions, he said, you know what? Let's get out of here. And on the mountain, somewhere on the mountain, he heard a roar coming from the stadium, and he went, uh-oh. And he knew right away something was incredible that he was going to hear about later on in the news.
Yes, it was, an absolutely unbelievable comeback, and obviously, as you mentioned, the collection of interceptions, something of an unlikely comeback for the Alouettes in that one. But sometimes you need to win a couple of ugly ones. I thought that the week before against Saskatchewan that the Alouettes deserved a better fate than what they got. So maybe this was just karma working things out a little bit for them.
What did you think of Tanner Marsh, and what did you know of him prior to his, CFL debut? Certainly, you're covering the CFL, but a third stringer. I mean, how much did you know about him?
Well, very little, obviously. But some of the background that we did have on Tanner Marsh coming in was that much of the feeling was that he had in fact been the Alouettes' probably second best quarterback during training camp, and if he had a little more experience, likely would have been labeled as the number 2 guy coming out of training camp. He impressed. A small college guy that made some things happen, turned some heads during camp, and I think you saw elements of that. Obviously, over the course of the game, I think that you saw sort of the good and bad of the young quarterback. You saw a guy who was willing to scramble, make some plays with his legs, improvise a little bit, forced to break away from the script and so on. At the same time, on the negative side, obviously you saw a few bad reads and some balls that probably shouldn't have been thrown, some bad decisions. But that's life of the growing pains. But I think one of the things that stood out was a little bit of that swagger, a little bit of that confidence showed through. And I think that's a big thing, is having a little bit of that command of the huddle and command of the field. And he showed that at times, and you can see that maybe there's something there for the Alouettes to build with going forward.
Duane, let's say the Alouettes go on a win streak here with Tanner Marsh at quarterback, and once Calvillo's healthy to go, what is going through Jim Pop's mind with the decision-making? Does he go with Calvillo, the old reliable, or keep with a hot hand in Tanner Marsh?
Well, I think that when you've got a healthy Anthony Calvillo, you get him on the field. Obviously the sort of unwritten rule on most teams is that you're not going to lose a starting job due to injury, and I think that applies even more so when you've got the lengthy career resume that Anthony Calvillo has put together. But I think that what it maybe opens the door for, and I think this is something that Jim Pop was open to even before the Anthony Calvillo injury, was when you look at other teams around the league. Winnipeg did it starting the year. You're seeing Hamilton have a lot of success with it now, is creating a bit of a package to take advantage of the specific skill set of their younger backup quarterback. And as well as that, it creates an opportunity to get that young player out on the field and get him some meaningful reps in the course of a game, rather than, just mop up time, whether you're winning by a blowout or losing by a blowout, but actually getting some meaning snaps within the course of the football game. And so I think that's the kind of thing that you could see the Alouettes start to look to do a little bit more once Calvillo's healthy.
We're chatting with Duane Forde from TSN, Duane Forde TSN on Twitter.com. And kind of related to the Alouettes, Duane, we had a regular caller here on Game Points, Louis from Ville-Mercier, and he asked a question last week on the program about a certain coach in the CFL and whether or not he might be on the radar of perhaps the Alouettes next year to replace Jim Pop as the head coach, or anywhere else for that matter. What are your thoughts on Jacques Chapdelaine with the BC Lions?
Well, I see Jacques as one of those guys, obviously, who, based on what he's done over the course of his coaching career and the fact that in the CIS ranks he's got some experience as a head coach, I see him as a guy who certainly would be on the radar of any team that has a coaching opening. He would be on that short list of guys within the league who you would expect to be interviewed when an opening comes up. Now, obviously, a little bit of the approach of the Alouettes in terms of their last hiring, and I would say that it probably went into the Mark Trestman hiring a little bit as well, was there was a definite plan or intent to hire from outside the league in terms of looking for bringing some new ideas to the league and so on, and a different creativity, a different background, and so on. Now, obviously, the way that the Dan Hawkins experiment worked out, they might not be as committed to going that route if they do find a candidate within the league who sells them on that. But obviously, the Alouettes themselves would have to be open to so-called experienced CFL assistants in order for that to happen.
Duane, you saw the Winnipeg Blue Bombers firsthand yesterday in Guelph in their dismantling by the Ticats on the Blue Bombers. What do you forecast now with Winnipeg moving into their next game? Obviously, Saskatchewan back-to-back Labor Day weekend. This looks like a complete mess for the Bombers from the quarterback position to every other position on that football field. Yeah,
that's a very good assessment of it. I think that there are some pieces there to build with. There are definitely some positive parts for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but the fact is, I think you're going to continue to see things get torn down there a little bit more as part of the rebuilding process. Obviously, most of the changes we've seen to this point have been in the front office and the coaching staff, but I would say based on what I saw yesterday, especially, you're going to see that start to hit the players. It reached a point yesterday where it was pretty apparent to me that it was a little bit less, even though the game wasn't out of reach in late third quarter and into the fourth quarter. It was pretty apparent that the Blue Bombers were more in a mode of evaluating everybody than they were necessarily trying to get the win in that football game, as I think probably all 42 players dressed for that game had a chance to play not just on special teams but on offense or defense. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see a few people moving on early this week.
Duane, final question for you. We had the COO of the Montreal Alouettes in studio a couple of weeks ago, Mark Waitman, and we were talking about next year in the Ottawa, I was going to say Rough Riders, the Ottawa Red Blacks coming back to the league, a franchise in Ottawa coming back to the league, and I kind of just, casually mentioned, Winnipeg going back to the West, and he said, well, that's not official as of yet. What other option would there be? That's kind of boggling my mind as to why it isn't just automatic that Winnipeg would be going to the West.
Well, I'll tell you, for me, geographically, obviously, it makes sense for Winnipeg to be in the West. But at the same time, I find myself tempted to look at the state of the league, in all honesty, and kind of say, you've had a number of years where I think you can make a pretty strong case for the West having been stronger than the East. And to think that you're going to add an expansion team as well to the East Division, it's not going to make that division any stronger. And given what the current playoff format is in the CFL, I don't think it's fair to the West, quite frankly. For me, I'll give you more my big picture answer, I guess, to this, which would be that when you look at a CFL schedule and teams right now play 18 games in an 8-team league, you play home and home against the teams in the other division, which means you're playing 10 games within your division, divided among the teams in your division. You go to a 9-team league, and now you start off, you play home and home with everybody, so that's going to take up 16 games. You're only playing 2 extra games now within your division, to fill out your schedule. And so my suggestion at this point is, from a playoff point of view, kind of do away with the divisions and let's just get the 6 best teams in, and instead of having to worry about what the balance is between East and so on, and kind of move forward based on what the league is right now. That's
interesting. I agree with that. I'd love to see just sort of a 9-team standings and let the best teams get up there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, thinking as you move down the road, there still remains the reasonable possibility for this to one day become a 10-team league. Well, once you do that, you're just playing home and home with everybody, and that's your 18 games. And and you then no longer have a schedule where you're playing extra games against teams within your division. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to have playoffs decided by division anymore when it's a completely balanced schedule. So it's, to me, to make that move when you're at 9 teams, when if you ever go to 10, it's basically what should happen anyway, I think is just something that makes sense for the league.
Finally, Duane, I guess you must be a happy Mustang as your University of Western Mustangs hammered U of T today.
I'm always a happy Mustang. It's, proud of my alma mater, but as much as anything, Mo, as you know, and as I'm sure you feel the same way, it's, I'm happy once CIS football is back on, once the season is rolling again, we get to see the next wave of stars in this country.
Duane, thank you so much for spending some time with us again. Duane can be seen on twitter.com/Duane Forde TSN. What's your next game for TSN?
I guess the next one will be I don't want to call it the Banjo Bowl, but the predecessor to the Banjo Bowl. So the Saskatchewan-Winnipeg matchup in Regina on Sunday.
All right. We're looking forward to that one. Thanks so much, Duane.
All right. My pleasure, guys. Have a good one.